What's up guys, I'm BTC. Moira has been getting a lot more use now that Mercy has been nerfed into the ground. But this actually brings up a couple of questions because a bug report by Blizzard a couple weeks ago shows that Moira might actually be headed for a really big nerf as well. Let's check it out. Earlier today, a couple of people brought to my attention a Blizzard bug report on Overwatch. Now, this was from a couple weeks ago. It's not exactly ancient, but it's not super up-to-date either. A lot of the stuff that was in this bug report has already been fixed. The main thing that we're going to be looking at is the second one on this list here, which says, the healing spray can reach and heal teammates on the other side of an enemy barrier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a bunch of experiments, and we're going to find out if this actually is a bug, or if it's consistent with how the rest of the game works. Now, just to quickly show you some of the other bugs that they had listed, like for example, attacking barriers with Biotic Grasp will not damage them. That's been fixed for forever. Moira's beam can visually disappear while attacking an enemy barrier. Again, that has also been fixed for a very long time. They also have a bunch of stuff listed for the Biotic Orb. And again, most of this has been changed. I want to point out that fourth one down though, Maze Ice Wall will consume Biotic Orb instead of letting it bounce off. They've changed this like 3 or 4 times. Originally, it would just get destroyed instantly no matter what, whether it was a healing or damage orb, friendly or enemy may. Then they made it so that it would bounce off. Then they made it so that the healing would pass through, but the damage one would just get destroyed. And then they changed it again, so what we have now is both orbs will just simply pass through the wall. So I have no idea what it's supposed to be, because they just keep changing it. Getting back on track though, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fully test this out. We're going to see what works and if it's consistent with how other abilities also work. So if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, because anytime stuff like this happens, I'll be sure to tell you guys everything you need to know. So subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any of it. So first up, rules and consistency with the abilities is very important. If one hero can do something and another hero does something very close to it, then you should expect to have a similar result. They should both functionally do the same thing. This is why I had no problem with the recent Junkrat nerf, because his Remote Mine was the only explosive ability in the game that didn't have fall off. So Pharah's Rockets, Soldier's Helix, Diva's Ult, all that stuff had fall off damage, but the remote didn't. So I thought it was perfectly fine to make it consistent with everything else in the game. So how do barriers usually work? Well, they keep bad stuff out and they let good stuff through, is the general rule. Now, it doesn't really matter if that good stuff is friendly or enemy. The good stuff almost always goes through, with a couple of exceptions. For Mercy and Zenyatta, both of their healing can pass through enemy barriers. Now, the way this works is actually kind of similar to how Zarya's projected bubble works. You're basically targeting a friendly character on the other side, and you're kind of like bypassing the barrier, as if it's not even there. And the reason for this is because the healing doesn't impact the barrier in any way, shape, form, or fashion. It doesn't cause any sort of damage to it, so it just passes right through it. Now, contrast this with Ana, for example, who doesn't actually have a solo healing thing, right? Her regular attack and her Bionade don't always only heal like the other two. Instead, the healing or the damage is applied depending on what the target is. If it's friendly, then it will get healed. If it's an enemy, then it will take damage. So this is why the barriers will catch a lot of that stuff from Ana, because when you're firing it out, the first thing that it comes into contact with is an enemy, and therefore it deals damage. So going off of that rule, where healing can go through and damage cannot, Moira's healing beam should go through the barriers because it has no way of adversely affecting any of the enemy players in any way. But then we have to ask, why doesn't Lucio's healing go through the barriers? If it's only healing, it should go through, right? No. The reason why it doesn't is because there's no targeting required by Lucio. It's just an aura that is permanently out there. And in the case of his ultimate, again, there's no targeting required. Anybody who happens to be in line of sight and within range will get affected by his ult or by his healing or his speed or whatever. So because there is no targeting, then it can get affected by the barriers. This is entirely consistent with all of the other abilities in the game that are non-targeted, area of effect, and they're not ground-based. That's really important. We'll get back to that in a second. But all those abilities like the Riptire, Diva's ult, Doomfist ult, Orissa's Bongo, all of that stuff is area of effect non-targeted, just like Lucio's abilities. So whether they're positive or negative, harmful, helpful, doesn't matter. An enemy barrier will block that from crossing. If it's a friendly barrier, then it just has no impact whatsoever. Now, there does appear to be 2 exceptions, but in truth, they're not really exceptions because they function by different rules. So those are going to be Soldier's Biotic Field and Mei's Ultimate. So both of those are non-targeting AoE abilities, but there's a slight difference. There's an actual field on the ground. So when those abilities are in effect, the abilities are checking 2 things. 1, does the enemy player or the friendly player have line of sight to the center of the object, the biotic field or the Mei ult? And is that player standing in the field itself? So if both of those checks are made, then the player will get acted upon by whatever the ability happens to be. A barrier is never even brought into the equation because in order to get affected, all you need is line of sight to the center and stand in the field. If both those are met, then you get affected, barrier or not. Getting back to Moira's healing, it's a cone that goes out in front of her. Just like Mei's left click is also a cone that goes in front of her, but it's a damaging attack, not a heal. So if we apply these rules to the barrier, you can see that Mei's attack does in fact get blocked by the barrier, but the healing, which is targeted but a cone, does not get blocked. We also see a similar consistency with Symmetra and Mercy. So Symmetra's attack is an auto lock, does not go through the barrier. Mercy's healing, also an auto lock, but it does go through the barrier. Now there's a couple of other possible exceptions, so let's run through those. The Biotic Orb, that does not go through barriers. But you know what? Neither does Orissa's right click. It doesn't go through the barriers. And I would argue that the reason for this is that while you can control where both of these orbs go, you cannot control what they lock onto. That is an auto-locking mechanism within the orb itself. So, because it's non-targeted, the orb itself decides where it's going to target. Because of that, it doesn't go through the barriers. Just for clarity, the orbs themselves can go through the barriers, but their effects cannot pass through a barrier. There is, of course, one attack that throws a monkey wrench into it, haha puns, and that would be Winston's primary attack, his Tesla. This is what appears to be a cone-based attack that goes in front of him. However, it completely ignores all barriers. I think this was specifically made to break the rules. And because of the nature of the way his weapon works, you know, it's all electricity type stuff. So this is the exception to all of it. Alright, so decision time. How is Moira's healing supposed to interact with barriers? Well, if we take everything else into account, we have the auto locks, the targeted, the non-targeted, helpful, harmful, line of sight, all that stuff. It seems to me that Moira's left-click healing should absolutely pass through enemy barriers all the time. Now, the fact that it says it's a bug is kind of worrisome. I hope that they don't actually change this, because right now, Moira's left-click healing is entirely consistent with how the entire rest of the game functions. So if they change it, it would be an exception to the consistency, an exception to the rules that they have for all the other abilities. And it would also be an absolutely massive, crippling nerf to the character. So I don't think that it should ever be blocked by barriers. Moira needs to be really up close, there is a finite amount of healing that she can do. It's not like the other healers where it's just an infinite amount of healing. She actually has to manage that healing resource. So because of all of that, and because that it is currently consistent with the way the rest of the game works, Moira's healing should go through barriers. And seeing as this is how the character has operated since they first put it on the PTR, I don't think they're going to change it because, again, it would be an absolutely massive character-breaking nerf. So I hope you learned something, not just about Moira, but about the consistency among the other characters. Also, don't forget to check out my Discord server. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. The links are down below. Thanks for watching. Remember, always blame the controller because it's never your fault. Also, special thanks to all my Patreon supporters for helping to make this all possible. If you'd like to see what kind of cool rewards you can get for supporting the channel, check the links on screen and down below.